Good morning and welcome to the leadership test with Drew Dudley. I am so excited for all that you are in store for this morning. My name is Jody Ozarski. I have the privilege of being on the team at the West Coast Chamber and also to facilitate our West Coast leadership program. Several years ago, as I was preparing for our leadership retreat, I was looking for resources that would be meaningful as we launched that leadership program year. And I stumbled upon Drew Dudley's lollipop videos. It was a TED Talk that he did, and it immediately resonated with me. And since I've become a huge fan of the work that Drew does to help develop and encourage leaders, you're in for a treat today as Drew presents a new presentation with us here today. When Drew's team reached out and asked about the potential of doing an event with us, that was a super simple yes for me. I was excited to be able to do that, partly because I knew that we had fantastic sponsors that walk alongside us and make events like this possible. So thank you to our leadership and talent development sponsors. It's your support that allows us to do meaningful events like this, even when it comes up at the last minute. Now, one of our core values at the West Coast Chamber is it's all about you. And I think you're going to experience that in a couple of ways this morning. First of all, it'll be where you experience this program, whether you're here at Sperry's in one of the lovely theaters, if you're watching from home and sipping some coffee and still wearing your slippers, or if you're at the office and enjoying this as a team. Welcome. We want to make this as easy for you to participate as possible and appreciate you joining us this morning. We also want to make it all about you so that you are getting the questions that you have answered. So at your seats this morning or in the text on Zoom, you'll see a phone number. Feel free throughout the program this morning to text any of your questions to that number. Drew will be presenting until 10 o'clock this morning. We'll take a brief pause. If you need to head back to the office at that time, feel free. But otherwise, we'll go into a period of question and answers. We want to make sure that you have the ability to have your specific questions answered as well. So with that, I would love to introduce Drew Dudley. I told him this morning that I was kind of fangirling out here as someone that has just been a big user of his videos. So Drew, welcome. Thanks for being here this morning. We appreciate your time, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so very, very much. Hi, everybody. Usually I say greetings from up north, but I think we're like right next to each other at this point. I'm coming at you from Toronto. My friends, I'm absolutely thrilled to get the chance to talk about leadership. You're the first presentation of 2023, so I'm excited about that. I am worried that this morning I got up and decided that I was going to try out my girlfriend's Christmas gift, which was a brand new beard trimmer. The person that she knows is, well, this dude. And so a couple hours after this, I have to walk out of this room and tell the woman who I think loves my beard more than me that this is her fault. So this may be my last presentation of all time. So I'm thrilled to get the chance to talk about leadership. It's weird choosing leadership as your topic to talk about sometimes feels like giving presentations on how to do the world's most perfect sit-up. Like some people in the audience are going to be super into it, but most people are going to listen and say, I don't think sit-ups are a big enough part of my life to want to listen to a guy talk about it for 60 minutes. And I understand that. The problem with the idea of leadership is that to a lot of people, we've been educated out of seeing it as part of who we are. Like I'm from the education system. And one of the things that I learned along the way is if you want people to understand a new concept, particularly when they're young, one of the ways that we do that is we give people examples of this new concept. But what I think we have to respect is whatever example you give someone first to explain a new idea, not only does it shape how they think about that idea for the rest of their life, it actually limits how they think about that idea for the rest of their life. So try to think about the first examples that you were ever given to help you explain what a leader was. And a lot of us can't even trace it all that back. Like a lot of the ideas, the ideologies, the beliefs that we use to judge people and to drive our behavior, we can't trace them back to where they came from. They've always just been something we knew to be true. And when we've always thought of something as true, we don't generally examine it that deeply. But I'll tell you, for most of you, the first example that you were ever given of what a leader was, I guarantee they were giants. They were presidents and they were scientific groundbreakers. They were people who conquered empires. The vast majority of them were also supposedly straight white men. And that has shaped the way that entire generations of people see leadership in others and themselves. Because look, I have no problem celebrating successful people. The challenge is, if the only examples we use to demonstrate what a leader looks like are these giants, it causes most of us to devalue the leadership that we demonstrate every day. And we start to let real moments of leadership pass us by, and we don't let ourselves take credit for them. We don't let ourselves feel good about it. And for better or for worse, the stuff that makes us feel good when we do it, that's the stuff that we're driven to do every day. Like, if it feels good, you will do it more often. This is my problem with carbs. But when we let moments of real leadership pass us by and we don't take credit for them, we don't celebrate it, when we let moments of leadership pass by our colleagues, our employees, our friends, the people we love the most, when we let moments of leadership pass by and we don't recognize and celebrate them as leadership, what we're effectively doing is we're pulling leadership out of our organizations, out of our communities, out of our lives, and off the planet. We need it. I've studied leadership my entire adult life. And so I will tell you, there is no shortage of leadership in your organizations, in your community, on this planet. But we're systematically ignoring a huge percentage of the leadership that surrounds us every day because we have been taught to define it too narrowly. We've created this world where the vast majority of the leadership on the planet, it's coming from people who don't consider themselves leaders. And I want to talk about how we can start to change that today. And the whole thing started for me. I ran the leadership development program at the University of Toronto for about 10 years. And I had these brilliant, extraordinary students. And one of them was dealing with, I guess, his first real example of an adult problem. And for that, I'll simply define it as the type of problem where you've got two basic choices for what to do. And one of them allows you to get what you want. And the other allows you to be the person that you want to be. And the two options are mutually exclusive. And he had been going back and forth all week about which path he wanted to go. He comes in on Friday and throws himself down on my office couch and, very frustrated, tells me, you know, it is a lot easier to stand up for an ideal than it is to live up to one, isn't it? And I thought that was genius for a 20-year-old. And it turns out he stole it. But I used to always tell my students that in leadership, you never steal an idea. You just benchmark a best practice. But he got me thinking about this gap that exists in all of our lives. No matter where we are in our lives and how old we are, there's a gap that exists between the person that we want to be and how we are actually behaving. And I don't think that gap is anything of which to be ashamed. I don't think most of us deny that we have it. I think what's most common is we rationalize that gap as being temporary. All right, we say, yeah, there's a gap between the person I want to be and how I'm behaving, but it's just until. It's just until the promotion. It's just until the baby comes. It's just until my student loans are paid off, till the pandemic is over, until the kids are off to college, whatever it is. There will always be a just until that allows us to rationalize this gap that exists. And my argument is that personal leadership on its foundational level comes from recognizing that that gap exists, acknowledging that you're the one who's responsible for its existence, and then having a plan every day to close that gap just a little bit. And there's an inherent, I think there's an inherent courage to which we should give, for which we should give ourselves credit, to get up every day and take on a challenge you know you will never win. Like, the gap between who you want to be and how you're behaving will never fully close. If it does, you should have higher expectations for what you want to do. But every day that we get up and try to close it, that's leadership. And it's a form of leadership to which we all can and should aspire. And I think when we open up the definition of leadership to more people, we start to recognize that more individuals within our businesses, within our communities, can feel comfortable calling themselves leaders. And people who feel comfortable calling themselves a leader, who feel comfortable believing that leadership traits are a part of who they are, they make better decisions. They make them faster. They're more creative as they make them. But I remember that I was driven to start a social experiment once I started thinking about that gap because of that student. And I gave my students a hypothetical power. And it's one I want all of you to consider for yourselves as well. I want you to imagine that you could choose one value and one value only. And whatever value you choose, every single member of this community is guaranteed to do at least one thing every day that lives up to that value. It's not the only value up to which you live. It's not going to push anything awesome out of the community, but it's the only value that's 100% guaranteed at least once every day. And you get to pick what it is. What do you choose? And my students thought for a long time, and they came back and they actually surprised me with their choice because they said, we pick impact. Now, the challenge with value words is they get thrown around all the time. And the only real common understanding we have is that that's a good word. Impact is a good word. Integrity is a good word. Accountability is a good word. But every time people start throwing around these words that are inherently value-driven, inherently judgmental, good or bad, I challenge my students, and I challenge you to think of it this way. Imagine somebody walks up to you, someone highly intelligent walks up to you and says, English is not my first language. The word, in this case, impact, isn't directly translatable to my language. Could you explain what that word means in the simplest English terms possible, please? And do you mind starting your answer with 3 words? A commitment to. So impact is a commitment to what? Integrity is a commitment to what? How do you actually finish that sentence? All of these words that we use all the time, like loaded with his inherent value judgments. What does that actually mean? And they went off and they argued about it and they came back and they said, all right, what we mean by impact is a commitment to creating moments that cause people to feel as if they are better off for having interacted with you. And I said, I love it. Go do it. Like, that's your assignment. Every day this week, I want you to actually live up to this thing you claim to stand for. Every day you've got to do one thing that actually lives that definition. But it's not just a written assignment. You have to come to my office every day before you go home. You have to look me in the eye and you have to tell me how you did that. And that was an amazing exercise for like 3 days. Because what would happen is, yeah, my students would come to my office, but I would watch them and they would stand in the outer office and I'd see them think for just a few moments before they come through the door. You could watch it happen. They go. And I realized that what they're doing is they were looking back over the course of their day and they were trying to identify a moment where they'd done this. And because they were awesome kids, like, they always had one. The problem was what they were doing is they were taking this value, this thing they said they wanted to be a fundamental part of their identity, and they were using it to evaluate behavior that had already happened. Like, it had already happened. We're looking back and trying to apply it afterwards. But what sets leaders apart, what really impactful leaders do, is that they find a way to fundamentally make sure that they're doing this all the time. Like, it's one thing to go out there and accidentally do it, but ultimately what really sets impact apart is, are you consistently making this happen? And so ultimately I said, you got to look me in the eye. But if you're looking back over the course of the day, it wasn't first and foremost. A value is only a value if you use it as criteria for decision making. And so if over the course of the day, we hadn't thought about this value, we only applied it afterwards, our values weren't actually driving our behavior. And if a value isn't used as criteria for decision making, it's not actually a value. It's just something that looks good on a website, something that is stuck on the bulletin board in the office, something that you put on an election sign. They're just these absolutely empty words. And so we said, okay, if we're not thinking about impact till the end of the day, it is not front of our mind as we make decisions. Good leaders use their values to make decisions every time the opportunity presents itself. What sets great leaders apart from good leaders is that good leaders live their values every time they get the chance. Great leaders create opportunities to live their values. So this wasn't working. We weren't thinking about impact throughout the course of the day. We applied it afterwards. And so we needed a different approach. Now, this is just regular. This isn't the mimosa bar. And so we need a different approach. One of the beautiful things about working at a university is you are consistently surrounded by people who are half your age and twice as smart as you are. Our job is to get them graduated before they figure out they're twice as smart as we are. And so what I did is I went to the psych department, because on a campus somewhere there is an expert on everything. And so I went to the psych department because these folks know how to mess with people's minds. And I said, can you explain to me how to control the behavior of 20-year-olds? And they laughed their ass off. I said, all right, let's be more specific. We have this behavior in which we hope to engage consciously. We want to do it every single day, but school is getting in the way. Work is getting in the way. Life is getting in the way. Do you have any behavioral psychology tricks? Any subconscious motivators that if we put them together with our conscious desire to act a certain way, we're way more likely to actually do it? And they said, yeah, actually, we've got a couple things that'll help you there. First thing they taught me is a phenomenon known as the Zeigarnik effect. And the Zeigarnik effect is actually very simple. It says that things on your to-do list that you have not yet completed take up a more prominent spot in your consciousness than things that you have completed. In other words, stuff on your to-do list you haven't finished bugs you until you finished it. And I think we all knew that. I wasn't aware there was a scientific term for it, but what I truly didn't understand is the depth of the discomfort your brain goes through when it has unfinished tasks to deal with. And we'll come back to that in a second. The second piece is called the question behavior effect. And the question behavior effect says that if you ask someone a series of questions about a particular behavior, they're actually way more likely to engage in that behavior later on down the road than if you had asked them to do it or if you had ordered them to do it. So if I sat down with any of you over breakfast and I said, okay, what does generosity mean to you? Who's the most generous person that you've ever met? What's the single most generous act you've ever witnessed? Later on in the day, you are way more likely to seek out, seize, or create an opportunity to be generous than if I had made it part of your job description or if I had asked you to do it as a personal favor to me. And knowing those two pieces of information, knowing that questions can be such a powerful driver of human behavior, knowing that unfinished tasks cause significant psychic discomfort until they are completed, we thought, you know what we're going to do to try to drive our behavior every day, to try to keep our values front in mind, to try to close the gap between how we want to behave and how we are actually behaving. What we're going to do is we're going to harness the power of the unanswered question. The human brain hates unanswered questions. It can't stand them. When we think that when we work on a question, we get it right, we get it wrong, or we give up and move on. But when you quote unquote give up and move on a question, only your conscious mind moves on. What your subconscious does is it takes the question, shoves it into your subconscious, lets the rest of your mind go and work on other things, but your subconscious keeps hammering away at that question, trying to find an answer to it without your conscious knowledge. And if it can't find an answer, it makes one up and convinces you that it's true. The human brain hates unanswered questions so badly, it would rather believe a lie it itself created than deal with the fact that it has this unanswered question in its mind. If you don't think you've ever had this phenomenon yourself, almost everyone has had an experience where you're trying to remember the name of an actor or an actress or a particular movie or a song, and you can't do it. You don't get around to Googling it, and you figure you just forget. But sometime in the next 24 to 48 hours, in the shower, at your desk, in your car, the name of the actor or the actress, the name of this, it just pops in your head, doesn't it? Because your brain never gave up on it. And we said, all right, here's what we're going to do to try to use this psychic discomfort to our advantage. Because the big thing for this particular experiment is the fact that your brain will change your behavior without you realizing it in order to find the answer to an unanswered question. So we said, let's create a question, one that's carefully crafted so that in order to answer the question, you have got to do something. And if you do that something, you will have accomplished the value. You're not chasing a nebulous concept. You're trying to answer a very specific question. But in the act of answering, you are driven to take a particular action. Let me give you an example. The first one we ever worked on was for the value of impact, a commitment to creating moments that make people feel like they're better off for having interacted with you. Well, what we came up with was, what have I done today to recognize someone else's leadership? Leadership is put on such a pedestal. It really is. And because it's put on such a pedestal, because it's seen as the exclusive domain of a relatively small group of people in society, the idea of saying to someone that you see leadership in them inherently has a positive impact. To say to any one of you, the way you do your job, the way you treat other people, the way you empower those around you has made me want to be a better person, a better professional. It has made me want to empower other people. It has given me the tools to have a better life. Like saying that to anyone, a former boss, someone who took time to mentor you when you're younger, saying that to anyone, it's impossible to tell someone that they have had an impact on you like that and not have a positive impact. They walk away feeling better off. So you can't answer this question without inherently living the value of impact. And so that became the assignment. I said, we're off for a week. We've got a reading week. So what I want you to do is every day for the next week, I want you to journal how you answer this question for the entire week that you're away. We come back and we have a 90-minute tutorial. We'll get together and we'll compare. How was it when you went out and tried to live impact versus putting this question in your phone to pop up 3 times a day as a reminder and have this in the back of your mind as a daily expectation. Let's see which of those two approaches has us acting with impact more frequently. Go do it. And that question made me quit my job because my students destroyed this assignment. They leaned into it, and it was their former coaches, their former teachers, their best friends, their parents, the incredibly nice hot dog guy on our campus. The man who sold hot dogs on our campus, I have tried for years to explain the particular type of energy this guy brought. And then Ted Lasso was created. The only way, for those of you familiar, to describe the guy who sold hot dogs on our campus when I worked there was he was Ted Lasso. He was the most obnoxiously upbeat human being that you could ever imagine. You buy a hot dog, you get a side of joy with it. And I remember on Thursday of this assignment, I went to buy my hot dog and he pulls it back and says, "What are you doing?" And I said, I'm buying a hot dog. He goes, "No, 3 of your students have called me a leader this week. What are you doing?" I had so many students come back, and just looking at the time, I think perhaps my favorite story that came back when we all got together for that tutorial is I had this remarkable student named Aaron, like at a whole other level of brilliance. And when he came back, he told us that what he had done is he had waited at the bus stop for his bus driver from kindergarten to grade 8. And the bus pulls up and all the kids get on. And then Aaron, my student, he gets on. And the bus driver, because he's good at his job, stops this random 22-year-old from getting on the bus and says, "What are you doing?" And Aaron says, I don't think you remember me, man, but I rode this bus for 9 years. And I was really, really overweight. And I was really, really smart. And anyone who's been through it knows that is an incredibly difficult combination with which to go through elementary school. And he says, I was bullied so badly that every single day before I could go to school, I would have to stand in the front hallway of my house and cry as hard as I could for 30 seconds. And then I could come out the door. And I get on the bus and I would sit right behind you because the cool kids sit at the back. They always have and they always will. And you would drive us to school. And you would sing Disney songs at the top of your lungs the whole way to school. Badly. And the kids at the back were merciless. Like they mocked everything about you. They mocked your singing. They mocked that you were a bus driver, how little money they thought you made as a result, how you dressed. Everything about you they made fun of. And you heard everything they said. I heard it. I was sitting right behind you. And you just kept singing. And everything in my life was made worse by what those kids said. Like what they said to me, what they said about me, what they told other people to say about me. Everything was made worse by what they said. And you took everything that they had and you just kept singing. I had never seen anyone act like those kids weren't important before. And I didn't know how to do it. But I wanted to tell you that every day when I got off this bus, the last thing I thought to myself is, one day you can be as strong as that man. Keep going. And look, I go to Harvard for grad school next year. And I wanted to tell you, you are as big a part of that as any teacher that I have ever had in my life. And I needed to tell you what a great leader you've been. So thank you. And there were 12 students and one instructor who dedicated themselves to 1 week of answering the question, what have I done today to recognize someone else's leadership? And when we got together for the 90-minute tutorial after that week, it turned into 4.5 hours. People skipped classes. People called in late for work so they could stay and they could listen to story after story after story. Because I think what happened is, for the first time in a lot of our lives, when I sent people out into the community to look for leadership, for the first time in a lot of our lives, we weren't looking for the people who were in charge of our lives. We were looking for the people who changed the way we felt as we lived it, which meant that it wasn't necessarily the people with the money or the titles, but it was Mohammed who sold hot dogs. It was the incredibly kind woman who works the coffee shop who knew everyone's name. It was the extraordinarily shy but wonderful human being who worked the front desk at financial aid. This was as shy a person as you would ever meet. But when a student would walk through the door of a financial aid office, so many of them believed that their dreams were about to be destroyed because of money. And this was the front line who let them know that that probably won't be the case. We will find a way. And 10 of the 12 students went over the course of that week and made a point of telling this person who would never consider herself a leader how much that she had meant to them. They all went out and they started doing this. Look, the question didn't change who we were, and it didn't change what we fundamentally valued. What it did was it changed how we behaved in relation to those values. It made us realize, as we looked around, how much leadership surrounded us every single day, coming from people who would never call themselves leaders. It made us so much more aware of how many opportunities were just dropped in our lap every day to recognize that leadership, and that we just let them pass by. But what's most important is it made us less likely to continue to allow those moments to pass by, because when our brain saw an opportunity, it didn't just think, oh, I can be a good person here, I can live my values. What our brain did was, oh, thank God, I need to get this off my mind and scratch it off the list. I don't care if that's what motivated the act, because the benefit to you and the person across from you was so fundamentally real. We loved this question. We answered it for 30 days in a row. And it was so powerful in creating moments like that, that at the end of that month, the students did something I have never seen before or since from a group of students. They asked for another test. They said, give us another one, let's do it. So we picked a second value and we defined it as a commitment to. And then we created another one of these action driving questions that made it impossible not to live the value as we answered it. And we made that question a daily expectation, just like the other one. And we tried to get 1 out of 2 for the next month. We knew we wouldn't be perfect. We got 1 out of 2. And then we added a third value that third month, and then a fourth and a fifth. And by the end of that academic year, we had created what I have come to call the leadership test. And it's evolved over the years. A big thing is that people hate tests. People hate the concept of tests so much that this term does not appear in my book because my editor told me to take it out. He's like, you can't call it a test. Nobody's interested in the test. And I thought a lot about it, and I realized why, because I've been surrounded my whole life, right? Every test you have to write for the first 20 years of your life is somebody else's test. Somebody else says, these are the questions to which I want answers. You have to give me the answers I want. I evaluate how well you do it. And then I decide how you're rewarded. And my evaluation has an impact on your future. That's 20 years of testing for us. That's incredibly stressful. It's wildly disempowering, because I'm sure most of you have figured out, even if you haven't articulated in these words, the only tests that define who you are as a leader or a person are the tests that you choose to give yourself. You learn so much about people by the pain they choose in their life. And we are all subject to pain beyond our control. There's no way around that. It's an awful fact of life. We will always be subject to pain over which we have no control. But we choose certain pain in our lives. And you learn stuff about yourselves by which pain you choose. Any one of you who run marathons, you have chosen pain in your life. You've chosen it for a reason, and it says something about you. But we all choose some of our pain. We all choose what tests to take on. And my argument is the leadership test is one worth choosing. And that we constructed it like this. We identified 6 values that were inherently important to us. My job is to help individuals and organizations figure out their own values, create their own version of this leadership test. But this is what drives me and my organization every day: impact, growth, courage, empowerment, class, and self-respect. And what we did is we created one of those action-driving questions for every single one of those values. What did I do today to recognize someone else's leadership? That drives those moments of impact. But growth, what did I do today to make it more likely someone would learn something? That could be us. That could be someone else. What did I try today that might not work, but I tried it anyway? This is an inherent question behind innovation, behind trying new things, behind the word pivot, for one we've heard so much in the last couple of years. We're educated out of our courage throughout the education system. Our evaluation in the education system is not based on what we know, it's based on how few mistakes we make demonstrating what we know, which means that often individuals who make the fewest mistakes learn relatively little along the way. And so ultimately, the effect of being evaluated based on how few mistakes you make makes us afraid of making mistakes. However, once you get out of a testing environment, that is such a limiting approach and mindset. So we have to find a way to get past this inherent education that says, be careful, because courage is fundamentally necessary to change anything in our lives or organizations. What did I do today to move someone else closer to a goal? Fundamentally, in a world that has taught us from a really young age, it's an economy of scarcity. Anything someone else gets is less for you, means that we were slowly educated out, or almost had a tiny little voice embedded in our head that says, be careful how much you help other people. You're hurting yourself in the long run, potentially. We have to unlearn that. We have to do it consistently every day. When did I elevate instead of escalate today? Class, a commitment to treating people and situations better than they deserve to be treated. The idea that the golden rule is a little bit flawed. You know, treat other people like you would like to be treated seems like a cool idea, but inherently it's one of the more self-centered approaches to looking at the world, right? The platinum rule, which a guy I was doing a workshop with taught me, says treat other people like they would like to be treated. It's a significantly more empathetic approach to life. But the idea of elevate versus escalate is, if we embrace the idea that elevating a situation is trying to find a way to succeed. Escalating a situation is trying to find a way to win. And very few things derail our ability to be successful together than one person having an unquenchable need to win. And the final value, self-respect. What did I do today to be good to myself? A commitment to recognizing that when you are empty, you have nothing to give. That's 6 questions. But it's not enough to just have the questions. The idea of the leadership test is adopting a particular mindset towards how you make decisions and set priorities on a given day. So imagine this. Imagine if every single night before you go to bed, you have to prove you deserve another day on this planet. Not at the end of a quarter or a year or a 5-year strategic plan. Every night before you go to bed, you have to prove you deserve tomorrow. To prove it, you have to pass a test. You have to get 3 answers out of 6 questions delivered by the end of the day, or you don't get another one. The thing is, you're given the questions in the morning. It's an open book test. You know what is expected of you to earn the next day. If that was our reality, these questions become non-negotiable. They aren't ones that we fill in when we have extra time. I feel that right now, moments like this, moments where we live the values we hope to, moments where we work on who we want to be instead of what we have to get done, they tend to come when we have a little bit of extra time. They're the extra bonus that we work on when we have a little bit more. The idea of approaching it like a test, a daily compulsory test, is the questions become non-negotiable. You don't answer them between meetings. You don't squeeze them in between picking up the kids and making lunches and getting to those 17 different meetings. They would drive your priorities and your decision-making every single day. And because the values, or the questions, sorry, are tied to the core values that we said we wanted to identify us, that we wanted to be associated with who we were, by adopting this philosophy, deep down inside what we were demanding of ourselves, what I continue to try to demand, is that we prioritize our to-be list at least the same level as our to-do list. And I'm not saying that your to-do list isn't important. We live in we have a social contract with one another. We need to make personal and professional obligations to one another, and we need to keep those obligations. However, if you take a step back and you look at your life, and you look at all the obligations that you have in a given day, if every obligation that you have in a given day is an obligation to someone else, you are living a life of obligation. And a life of obligation in the long run is incredibly disempowering, and it is not sustainable. But if you can identify 10% of your daily commitments and make them commitments to yourself, and that's what these 6 questions are for me. These represent 10% of my daily commitments, but they're commitments to me. That still leaves 90% of your daily commitments to other people. 90% is a life of service. And a life of service is extraordinarily empowering. But it's fundamentally necessary to reshift your mind to say, living up to my to-be list is not something that gets fit in when I have a chance. All of these questions can be answered through my work. I didn't try to create any kind of process that you need extra time or only works when you're having a good day, because those days are relatively few and far between. But the idea of the leadership test is that when you have no idea what the future holds, what it does is it provides you with a roadmap through uncertainty for today. Because you may not know where you're going to be next month, where you're going to be 2 months from now. So what you have to be able to do is say, well, what do I do when there's uncertainty? These are daily behaviors that we can keep a part of our behavior all the time. So regardless of whether or not we know when the future's coming or what it holds, we can be proud of the person we are when we get there, and we can maintain momentum all the way through. The leadership test, what I was trying to do is capture an unfortunate reality of life and work, but one that we're better off when we deal with it. It's that we're not always in charge of what we get to do every day. It's just you can be CEO and you're still not in charge of what you have to do every day, but you're always in charge of who you are. Like, nobody gets to take that away. But honestly, like, my students were in their early 20s when we did this. I was in my mid-30s. And it was such a kick in the stomach to look and realize how long it had been since I could honestly say that most of my priorities and behaviors in any given day, personally and professionally, were driven more by the person that I wanted to be than the crap that I had to get done. I'm not saying our to-do list isn't important. What I'm saying is that without even noticing, many of us have allowed our to-do list to be the only driving force behind our priorities. The opportunity every single day to say, look, here is a roadmap through uncertainty. And even on the days where everything outside of your control blows up in your face, at least you can say, but on this day, I had these 3 moments where I was the person I want to be. Sometimes that's the only thing you get in a given day, but it changes the way you think about them. Because I think right now, when we get no opportunity to do what we want and everything blows up in our face, we start thinking that the day was a waste. If you can still get 3 of your value-driven questions, the day wasn't a waste, it was a loss. And that doesn't sound awesome, but losses are better than wastes. Because if you go in and you lose and you lose and you lose, at least you know that you were fighting. But when you start stringing enough days together that you say, oh, I wasted that one, it changes how you feel about yourself, which always changes how you treat other people. This is a tool that I gave to my better angels to try to get them combat my demons most days. Because my drive on most days isn't to go out and always live up to the man that I want to be. I do that when I get the chance. This particular approach says to me that living your values isn't something you do when you got extra time. These need to be built in to your priorities and your decision-making every day, because what it does is it gives you evidence that you are living your values. Right now, most of us don't think we're that good a person, because most of us allow the moments where we are being leaders, where we are having an impact, to just pass by unrecognized and uncelebrated. That's 6 questions. 2 of them are designed to add value to other people. 2 of them are designed to add value to you. 2 can go either way. You ace that test every day for a year, you've added over 2,000 conscious moments of leadership, conscious moments of impact, of empowerment, of self-respect. 2,000 in a given year. The thing is, you don't have to ace it. You just have to pass it. 3 questions out of 6. That is still 1,000 moments every single year. And this isn't a little thing, because there is a question. I wish I was there live so I could point at some poor person in the audience and demand they answer this. But just imagine this one. How would you answer this? Why do you matter? Like, why do you matter? Any answer you want to give, personal, professional, it doesn't matter. Why do you matter? Like, if you have kids, go home tonight, ask them that question. If they're under the age of 5, they will give you answers that melt your heart. I had a woman send me a video once. She asked her 5-year-old, hey, why do you matter? He cocks his head. He goes, because I'm a hug monster. And then the camera just goes black as he hugs it. But what I found, the first time I ever asked a student, I had been in education for over 10 years. And he was scared and he was getting ready to graduate. And I wanted to put his mind at ease. And I said, okay, let's start here, man. Why do you matter? And we'll go from there. And this brilliant, extraordinary, compassionate kid, he looks at me, blinks twice. And then he says, well, I don't yet. That's why I'm working so hard. And that's an unacceptable answer to get from anybody that you care about. But then I started asking other students. I thought that must just be like, he's so driven. It just must be. No, my colleagues, senior executives. I travel all around the world now. I've asked that question to hundreds of people who are by every objective measure wildly successful. 95% of the people to whom I pose the question, why do you matter, either cannot give me an answer or they're making one up on the spot. It's because nobody asks us. When was the last time you were asked that question? Ask people who you care about, why do they matter? Because we don't start thinking about it until somebody asks us. And I think the reason that we struggle with it is because we hope to matter and we hope to lead and we hope to make a difference. Look, hope is a wildly powerful force. And we should foster hope in our lives and the lives of everybody that we touch. But hope is a terrible strategy. If you want to matter, you want to lead, and you want to make a difference, we have to plan to matter, plan to lead, and plan to make a difference. That's the idea of the leadership test, of identifying the values you want to live and using this psychological trick so that you can actually prove to yourself you're doing it 1,000 times a year, to give yourself 1,000 pieces of evidence that you matter. It changes everything. Why does all this talk about values matter for the numbers folks out there? Why do I harp so much on taking the time to figure out what your own values are? It's because that's not where the money and attention goes. The money, attention, and consulting goes to what are our corporate values, what are our business values, and how can we foster alignment between our employees and our corporate values. For what it's worth, you really don't have to work that hard at that. This idea of value alignment's a bit of a red herring. You don't need value alignment between your organization and the people within it. What you need is an absence of value conflict. Customer service and compassion are not the same value, but they are certainly not in conflict. The idea that you only can hire people who have the exact same articulated values, or you have to find a way to have them adopt them, is not nearly as important as asking yourself, do I make sure myself and the people around me understand their personal values and get to live them every day through work? Two of the most important leadership researchers in the world wanted to see how important corporate and personal values were in the effectiveness of a workplace. And so over thousands and thousands of data points, they measured how clear employees across a wide variety of industries, how clear they understood their own values. And then they measured how well they understood their company's values. Those things on the website, on the bulletin board, the staff meeting was all about them. And then they measured 4 different factors: how committed they were to their organization, how proud they were, how motivated, and overall how happy they were. They gave that combination mark at a 7. And if you got a 7 on those 4 measures, you weren't leaving your job. You loved it. They could offer you more money, a better title. You still would hesitate to leave. But if you got a 0, somebody took your stapler, you're burning the place down. And what they found, as you would expect, is that, yeah, individuals who had a high level of organizational clarity, values, and their own, they were the most committed. Those who had both were happy, committed, really unlikely to leave, 6.26 out of 7. But you would figure in some way that it'd be this little other corner down here where they were low on both their personal and organizational value clarity, that they'd be the worst employees. They weren't. It was the individuals who had a tremendous amount of clarity on their organizational values, but not their own. As a matter of fact, directly correlated to overall employee engagement, productivity, and happiness was their personal value clarity, independent of their understanding of the corporate values. The big untapped gear that organizations and people and individuals trying to inspire and motivate others are missing is helping individuals figure out their own values and get to live them every day through their work. You don't need them to adopt fully your values. You need to make sure that the people within your organization, on your team, understand their own and feel like they actually get to prove it every day. That's the power of the leadership test. That's the power of giving people a clear daily roadmap to impact. Because when I talk about leadership, I'm talking about something really specific today. I'm talking about individual moments of interpersonal impact, moments of impact, of compassion, of empowerment, of courage. These individual moments is where leadership lives, but we've been taught it isn't in the behaviors, it's in the accolades and achievements that emerge out of those daily behaviors. I think that we can reframe what leadership means to each of us. I run a company called Day One Leadership because the idea of a day one of any difficult thing has been a massive part of who I am. I've had day one of starting my own company. I left the most secure job on the planet at a university to do this. I had day one of being a guy who went from well over 320 pounds to more 100 pounds lighter. I had day one of no longer being a man who worked so hard to hide the fact that I'm bipolar. Because we still live in a world that teaches that mental illness is mental weakness. And my entire career is based on the idea that you will find my ideas credible. And so I kept that quiet for a long time because I think, like a lot of us, we're taught that if you want to be impressive, if you want people to invite you to give speeches or give you awards, what you need to find a way to do is get people to look at you and say, oh my God, I can't do that. Since I started talking about this, what I've discovered is that maybe the most maybe the most impactful thing you can do for others isn't to find a way to make them look at you and say, oh, wow, I can't do that. It's to find a way to let them look at you and say, oh my God, I thought I was the only one. I thought I was the only one who was afraid of that. I thought I was the only one hurt by that. I thought I was the only one hiding that. Because the amount of energy that goes into playing a character every day at work, of playing the character who is not struggling with this thing at home, of playing a character who isn't dealing with their own mental illness, who isn't dealing with their own anxiety, who isn't dealing with their own grief or their trauma. The power it takes to play that character takes away from how well you do your job and how well you treat other people. The amount of psychic energy it takes to hide and play a character is immense. The ability to step up and say, this is who I am. I think we're afraid people will attack us and use it to their advantage. What I have found in my experience, when you step up and start saying, every day I'm going to commit to not hiding this part of me, is that I found so many more people stood up and said, I thought I was the only one. And now I'm far less alone, even if I'm identified by some people as being a part of this group. It doesn't matter, because now I've got people standing next to me. I had day one of that life. I had day one of a life without alcohol. Like, I'm powerless over alcohol. Step one. But one of the things I discovered in recovery is if you don't want to have a drink for the rest of your life, you have to choose not to have a drink today. And then you have to make that choice every day for the rest of your life as if it is your first day of recovery. Because on the first day of anything long-term, of anything difficult, there is an inherent commitment, humility, and forgiveness. And that commitment, humility, and forgiveness allows you to say, everybody screws up on the first day. If I screw up, it doesn't mean I'm not worthy. It means I have to recommit. But the idea of treating every day as if it's the first day of that difficult voyage is it allows you to adopt a mindset where you can't rest on your laurels about what you've already accomplished. Like, it doesn't matter that I haven't had a drink in 2,871 days if I don't make that same choice today. I don't get to rest on what I've accomplished. It's today's behavior that matters. But it also means you don't get overwhelmed by how much there is still to do. I have an addiction. I have to fight it every day. And it's not an easy fight. I hope I have thousands of more days in my life. But every now and then when you stop and you think about how many more times you have to do that fight, it's enough to make you say, why bother today? I won't be able to do it 10 days from now. So if you take out what's in the past, you take out what's in the future and you still have to do, and you say, here are my priorities, my non-negotiable behaviors today. That allows us to maintain momentum. And I will tell you, 5-year momentum is so much more important than 5-year plans. Day one of your leadership is the day you say, these are the non-negotiable behaviors that will be a part of every day of the rest of my life. And those non-negotiable behaviors should be tied directly to the values that not that you want other people to see in you, but at the end of the day, if you sit back and everything outside of your control blew up, but you could have these 3 moments where you said, I did these 3 values, what are the ones that would allow you to say, everything else sucked today, but that was enough for me? Let's build that into our lives. Because I think we've been taught that leadership is in these huge moments, that it's in the big stuff. Leadership isn't in the big stuff. Leadership is in the consistent stuff. And ordinary acts done with extraordinary consistency change worlds. Because we all have values that we live whenever we get the chance. But how do we turn around these moments where we're everything we hope to be accidentally and say to ourselves, that wasn't just an accident. I can't just expect to fluke into that. I used to think of leadership as this little club that not everyone can or should get into. It was because if everybody can be a leader, why am I working so hard, right? Why am I trying to get into the best schools and work 100-hour work weeks so I can get promotions? And if everyone's a leader, doesn't it diminish the work I'm putting in? And I looked at this club full of leaders and they all looked just like me. Like, it never occurred to me I couldn't get in the club. It was just whether or not I could work my way into it because everyone looked like me. And I know that for a lot of you watching, you never had that privilege either. And a lot of things changed my focus from the idea of leadership as accolades and power earned over time to interpersonal moments of impact. but I'll close with the one that probably started it all. Some of you may have come across this one. I was at my first university for 7 years because I was taught letters after your name make you smarter. And so I collected them. And the night I was leaving, a young woman came up to me and she said, I remember the first time that I ever met you. And she told me a story that had happened 3.5 years earlier. And she said, the first day that I was ever here at this school, I was in line on my first day and everyone was screaming. Face paint, matching t-shirts, coordinated cheers. It was just this overwhelming cacophony of noise. And I had wanted to go to school my whole life, but the night before, all of a sudden I had become overwhelmed with this immense feeling of self-doubt. And I had started to cry the night before. And my parents, they hadn't seen me cry in years, but they were amazing. They said, look, we know you're scared. Trust us, we're way more scared than you are. But you've worked so hard for this. You owe it to yourself. So here's the deal. Tomorrow we'll go to campus. Once we are on the campus, if you still feel that you can't do this, we will take you home and we love you no matter what. But if you don't go tomorrow, you'll regret that the rest of your life. Our job as your parents is to make sure that that doesn't happen. And she goes, I knew they were right. My whole life I'd been told there's no such thing as success if you don't have this piece of paper. So I'd gotten in line on that first day. But when I heard all of that noise, I just knew I couldn't do it. And so I turned to my mom and my dad to say, take me home, like they said they would. But before I could say anything, you come out of the nearest building wearing this epically stupid hat and a sign that said students fighting cystic fibrosis. And you had a bucket full of lollipops. And you were walking up this line of first-year students and their parents who were stuck in line for registration. And you're handing out these lollipops. You're trying to make people laugh. And you're trying to convince us to get up early on a Saturday morning to shine shoes for 8 hours for charity. And you're coming along the line. All of a sudden you get to me and you stop and you just stare at me. And then you look at the guy next to me, I've never seen before, and you smile and you hold out a lollipop to him and you go, dude, you have to stand next to this incredibly beautiful woman for the next 2.5 hours. And you won't even talk to her. Come on, man, break the ice, give her a lollipop. And I will point out that 20 years has taught me that was not at all respectful of her personal space. She probably didn't want to get hit on in that moment. It was incredibly inconsiderate, but I will play this one till the end because this time it worked out. She goes, I've never seen this guy before in my life, but he turns this beet red. He won't even look at me. He just does this with the lollipop. And I feel so bad for him that I take it. But as soon as I take it from him, your entire demeanor changes and you look so upset. And you turn to my mom and my dad and you say, look at your little girl. Look at your little girl. It's her first day away from home. First day without mom and dad to hold her hand. And already she is taking candy from a stranger. Nice parenting. And she goes, everybody laughed for 20 feet in every direction. Everybody started to laugh. And I don't know why, man, but when everybody was laughing, something changed in my mind. And I just said to myself, all right, just quit tomorrow. Like, you don't have to quit today, quit tomorrow. And then the next day, someone else did something and I said it again for one more day and then another. And eventually I stopped thinking about it. And I graduate at the end of this year. And I haven't seen you in the 3.5 years since that happened. I haven't talked to you in the 3.5 years since that happened, but I heard that you were leaving. And before that happened, I had to come and tell you, you have been an incredibly important person in my life. And I'm really going to miss you. So good luck, okay? She just walks off. Like, don't do that. Don't tell someone that story. Drop the mic and wander away. Because I had no idea how to process that. And I think she figured that out because she comes back and she says, there's one more thing I guess you should know. I've been dating that dude for 3.5 years since you introduced us that morning. And then 1.5 years after I moved 1,000 miles from the east coast of Canada to Toronto to start my career, the two of them invited me to their wedding. Like, she married the dude. But here's the thing that drives me is I don't remember that. Like I have no recollection of that moment. And I've searched my memory for that moment because I was awesome in that moment. I would like to remember having said that. I have no recollection. And that drives the work that I share with everybody, regardless of your title or how much money you make or how successful your business is or isn't. What I want to let people know is that maybe the biggest moment of leadership in my life, maybe the biggest impact I ever had on another human being, a moment that had a girl walk up to a stranger 4 years later and say, "You have been an incredibly important person in my life." It's a moment that I don't even remember. Like we've been taught from a young age to try to achieve things and acquire things so that people look at us like we're leaders, so that we feel we have the right to raise our hands in front of people and say, "I am a leader," that I think we've lost sight of an essential truth. The primary determinant of how other people view us, and more importantly, how we view ourselves, is how we actually behave on a day-to-day basis. And most of us do not have a process in place that makes sure that our daily leadership behaviors not just happen, but that they're tied to the type of person that we want to be. We've been taught that leadership is in these big moments. Leadership is about changing the world. For what it is worth, there is no world. There's just 8 billion understandings of it. And that means every time you change one person's understanding of the world, one person's understanding of what they're capable of, one person's understanding of how many people care about them, one person's understanding of how powerful an agent for change they can be in this world, and sometimes more importantly, how powerful an agent for change they can be in their own life. Every time you change one person's understanding of the world, you have changed the whole world. And that's not beneath any of us, and it's not beyond any of us. I want to redefine leadership as being about lollipop moments, how many of them we create, how many we say thank you for, and how many we empower other people to create for themselves. Because I think we made leadership into something bigger than most of us. I think we can bring it back into something that impacts people every day. And I think if we teach leadership like that, embrace leadership like that, and celebrate leadership like that, I think we can change everything. And that's a simple idea. That doesn't mean that it's a small one. My friends, thank you so much for letting me share ideas with you for the first time in 2023. I welcome any questions that came in. I apologize if I stumbled a couple of times there. It's been a month off. Thank you so much for listening. There is no more amazing gift from people than their time. Thanks, my friends.
Drew, thank you. I was furiously scribbling notes on my cards here as I was listening to you. I appreciate the challenges that you've brought. For our friends that are joining us here in person today, we understand if it's time that you need to head back to the office, feel free to sneak out as you need, but we have absolutely been having questions come in throughout the presentation, and I'd love to pose those to you now if I could.
Of course,
The
fire away.
first one I really love. I've seen a presentation you've done before, Drew, where you ask people to raise their hand if they identified as a leader, and very few people end up identifying that way. And I think we hear it often referred to as imposter syndrome. So how do you see imposter syndrome affecting leadership, and what can we do to kind of get past that?
Yeah, well, one, engage every day in non-deniable acts of leadership. It's because I was the same way, right? Our brain will go to great lengths to tell us that we suck. And so what I try to do, I try the leadership test a tool because I'm not driven to be a good guy instinctively. I'm open about that. And it's weird because you give speeches, and I think people get the impression that you're up there to teach how you figured out how to make life awesome all the time. I haven't, but what I've done is I put a tool in place to make sure that all the crap out there doesn't make me a crappy person, if that makes any sense. So I love saying, have this test each day, even if you pick one question to begin with, because it's an undeniable piece of evidence that you do matter. Now, imposter syndrome. I can't tell people how to fix imposter syndrome, but what I can try to do is share this way of looking at it for what it's worth. We have taken something that everybody feels, not everybody, but the vast majority of people you'd like to spend any time with feel this way. And we've called it a syndrome, which is really tied to pathology, the idea that it's a syndrome, that it's a disease, that it sets you apart from other people in a negative way. Like, we shouldn't think of disease that way, but we do. And so by taking something that is a universal human experience, self-doubt, the inability to believe in yourself, sometimes fear, jealousy, whatever it is, those are universal human emotions. The feeling that you're going to be found out, or that you're going to screw up, or that people aren't going to like you, universal human emotion. And what we've done is we've taken something everybody feels and we've called it a syndrome. We've given it and said, there's something wrong with you for having a universal human condition. And that, I think, is the problem, because we call it imposter syndrome the same way we say the phrase fake it till you make it. Words are important. The phrase fake it till you make it basically means practice till you're good at it. And when I'm practicing at something I'm not good at, I'm not faking it. All right. I'm practicing until I become better. But what we've done is we've said to anybody who doesn't go into a job and immediately feels like they're the best who ever did it, you're faking this until you make it. And that leads to this idea of you having imposter syndrome. It's not a syndrome, it's a universal human condition. So why are we treating it as if it's something that you're afflicted with and you have to get through? So for what it's worth, let's stop saying imposter syndrome. It's like saying sadness syndrome or laughter syndrome or hiccup syndrome. Like these are things everybody gets. And we shouldn't throw this word on the end that says you need to find a way to get rid of it. I think what we need to do is acknowledge that that doubt is something that we have to find a way to tackle each day. Because if we don't attack the doubt, if we don't at least attempt to prove it wrong every day, then we have no reason not to believe it, if that makes any sense. So my argument is identify these values, act every day in a way that at least creates almost like a lawyer in your brain, so that when your brain starts crapping on you, at least there's someone that stands up and goes, whoa, hold up. What about all this crap? Like, have you noticed that it seems like the part of our brain that hates us has this really good lawyer that is making these really compelling arguments? Every now and then I'd like someone to stand up and just pound the table and be like, objection, 6 questions, come on. So that's what I'm trying to create for people. But let's stop saying fake it till you make it. Let's stop saying imposter syndrome. When it affects everybody, it's not some sort of disease that we should create some sort of stigma around, if you know what I mean. Don't feel stigmatized for something that's true of everybody, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that. I think people are always shocked to see who struggles with identifying as a leader.
Oh, yeah. I do say that.
Yeah.
Sorry, 90% of the people, less than 1% of the time when I ask the question, how many people here will call themselves a leader when I'm live? Less than 1% of the time do I get half the people in the audience willing to say it. It's mind-boggling. And that's at conferences with almost all CEOs sometimes. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I apologize.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. And we had some questions come in from younger leaders. My heart kind of broke when I heard you say that someone in your class said they didn't matter yet. How do you suggest for some of our younger leaders, what are some of those first steps that they can make, especially if they don't find themselves in a position where they are identified as a leader?
Yeah, I think that to reframe leadership as individual moments of interpersonal impact, and then asking yourself, how do I best provide moments of interpersonal impact? Not what's the best way other people do it, not, what are some cool things I've seen people who love to be the center of attention do, or people with more power. It's ask yourself, what has mattered the most to me in terms of moments that truly made me feel seen? As goofy as the I see you thing from Avatar is, the power of making someone feel seen is very real. What made you feel that way? And then that's within your power to do for other people. I think it's important I acknowledge this with my students. They don't have a lot of power in their life. They have part-time jobs with bosses. A lot of them live at home with their parents. Their professors and teachers tell them what they have to do. But what they always do have is the power to decide how they will impact the people around them. The other thing that I think would really help, and this is also for parents of young people, is that there are lessons that are learned, though never explicitly taught within the education system. And teachers know it too, and they do everything they can to battle against them, but systems are more powerful than individuals. And one of the things that I think we could really help in terms of helping young people feel like they have the right to call themselves a leader in a world that tends to tell them to wait in line, like it's not your turn yet, is to start to put more focus on acknowledging and rewarding people whose emotional intelligence and behavior is as positive as people who write tests and essays well. And so I think that as parents and as other students, to recognize that we tend to respond to rewards, and that right now young people get rewarded more for getting good grades than they do for being good people throughout the education system. And so people are going to gravitate to the thing that has the most obvious rewards. And when we don't reward a young person who is the shoulder for all of their friends, who is the backbone and the emotional intelligence of the group, but gets B's, when we allow them to think that in the eyes of the education system and the adults within it, that, they're on the second tier, that's a problem. So one of the things I encourage is the phrase within the education realm and as parents, work incredibly hard to make your grades extraordinary, but then work twice as hard to make sure they are the least impressive thing about you. The earlier on we can get young people into that mindset that it is important to work incredibly hard to make my grades, these evaluative, very practical, and I can see them rewards. How on earth can we let them know that's important? Because it will open doors for you and it will kick down doors for you. But by early on saying, we want those to be the least impressive thing about you. We want who you are, how you treat people, and how you impact this world to be the most important thing. That will change how people choose to feel about themselves at a young age. Right now, it is sports and it is academics that allow kids to decide whether adults like them or not. What we can all do is say to people, work so hard to make your grades amazing. Make sure they're the least impressive thing about you. Oh, what does that mean? Who are you? What do you want to do? How do you want to impact people? The same thing with your job. Make sure your bank account, make sure your car, make sure your job is the best you can possibly make it. And then make sure it's the least impressive thing about you. Like if the coolest thing about you is what you drive, be better.
Drew, that leads well into the next question that we had. You talked about the importance of personal values being more important even for employee retention than identifying with corporate values, especially for some of our younger leaders. What's that process of going through and really identifying your own personal values?
You know what? This could work for everybody. And for young people, they have a harder time at this because the process I use to help you start to understand your values, I call the edge of the bed advice. And I find this to be an interesting exercise, not only personally, but within your team. And the edge of the bed advice was born because I don't like small talk. And as you can imagine, with the number of banquets where I don't know anybody, or receptions, or train and plane rides where you're sitting next to strangers, or you have a conversation and you don't know anything about each other, I found I love asking the edge of the bed advice, which is, I want you to imagine that someone you love so much, you want them to have a better life than you do. They're living with you, but it's their last night. They're 18 years old. They're about to go out into the world. And you go by their room that last night. They call you in, you sit on the edge of the bed, and they look at you and they say, what do I need to know? Like what experiences, successes, failures, insights, behaviors have most contributed to your happiness? Like just of someone saying to you, imagine this, what insights, experiences, actions, behaviors, habits have most contributed to your happiness? Most of us have never stepped back, taken a look at our life, and thought about why we're wise. I encourage people to come up with as many as possible. Write down 30 of them, because when you ask people for one, it's overwhelming. Like, what's the one piece of advice that you would give? Like, I don't know, never start a land war in Asia. Like, there's got to be one. It's too much, So let people write as many as they want. Let them just get flowing about what do they know to be true about friendship? What do they know to be true about failure? What do you know to be true about love? Just sit down every morning and pick a topic: love, friendship, failure, food, and ask, what do I know to be true about this topic? And then just look at your life and start writing down the wisdom you'd want to pass on. Come up with 30 of them. Doesn't have to be in one sitting. You could do it over a month, one a day. And then what you do is you realize that when you write down your most important life lessons, of all the experience you've had in your life, these are the ones you think are most important. Every piece of advice has at its foundation a set of values. When you give someone a piece of life advice, and when you say, like, for instance, I love pointing out to people that there are a lot more Rosalines in the world than there are Juliets. It's something I learned. I used to read Shakespeare all the time. I thought I was going to be, an English major. And at the beginning of Romeo and Juliet, I don't know if you remember, Romeo is deeply in love with a girl named Rosaline. And we never see her because Juliet comes along and he never thinks of her again. And this thing that he had to have to live, he completely forgets when he finds the thing he is actually meant for. And I started to realize that jobs and relationships and the house with the picket fence, or the particular career that we think we want, is often a Rosaline. And when we don't get it, I want people to understand it was probably a Rosaline. Wait, Juliet's coming. But also remember that Romeo and Juliet die at the end of that story. Like, love doesn't conquer all. This is an important life lesson. Love doesn't conquer all. But love has a really good winning percentage. Like, love is LeBron James, and we should adjust our expectations accordingly. But what I do is I say, take a look at your piece of advice, and then say, what I'm actually saying to someone is, if you took this advice to heart and lived by it every day, you would do a better job embodying the values of X, Y, and Z. There are more Rosalines than Juliets is about self-awareness. It's about resilience of not getting something. So you take a look at each of your pieces of advice and you ask, what are the 1 to 3 foundational values that I'm teaching someone here? And you write them down. And you do that for each of your 30 pieces of advice. You'll end up with somewhere between 30 and 90 values that you identified as foundational to your advice. Between 3 and 6 of those values will occur over and over and over again relative to the other ones. Those are where you start. But not just identifying your values, but the actual act of identifying 30 lessons in your life in and of itself will teach you a lot about what you value. That's a long answer, but that's actually an activity that you can start doing. Take a step back and say, if this is what I believe is important in life, what are the values that I didn't even realize were core to who I was?
That's great recommendation for us, Drew. We had a number of questions regarding the 6 questions that you had as a part of that leadership test. One of them, you talked a little bit about that 2 are about others, 2 are about yourself. I think leaders often are focused on others more than themselves, and often take a toll on their own personal well-being. So how do you recommend making yourself a priority in this process?
Yeah, I'm going to pop up for a second, the 6 questions. And one thing you'll find interesting is that I try to make this very clear to people, is that number 6, self-respect, is not the last question. It's the foundation of the entire pillar. Without that one, there isn't. The reason I've got self-respect in the leadership test is I think that some version of self-respect, self-awareness, self-examination, self-empowerment needs to be in everybody's leadership test. It's the easiest thing to leave that people forget about, particularly, as you said, individuals interested in serving others. I think what we forget is that we have a choice to make when it comes to serving others. Are we the plug that they plug into that allows them to be sustainable in power, or are we a battery that we stick in? And guess what? The battery is effective, but it wears out. And if we decide that we want to be a battery for other people, we are going to get eaten up, and you never get recharged to full again. So I've always looked at it, it's a choice we make about how we are going to choose our leadership. Are we a plug or are we a battery? Both will provide power, but one is far more sustainable than the other. Yeah, I know there's recyclable or rechargeable batteries, but I hope you get what my idea is that leadership is not martyrdom. And somewhere along the way, I think in an effort to set an example for hard work, what leaders do is that they forget that the reason they're working so hard is they see themselves as responsible for supporting other people. But in the process of destroying yourself, you are taking away a support for someone else eventually. And it's almost like we think, but as long as I burn myself out on the way, nobody can claim that I'm a bad person for leaving them once I burn out. I try to take the approach being like, look, I'm an outlet, I'm a socket. I can provide you power, but only if I make sure that I'm powered up first. It's not being self-absorbed. The way I look at it is this way. Once a week, like this is a simple practical trick I use. Once a week, ask yourself, am I treating myself with the same level of respect I treat my phone? Because you charge your phone constantly. You put a protective case around it because you know it's going to hit the ground. And when it hits the ground, you pick it up and move on because everyone drops their phone, right? But we don't wrap ourselves in any kind of protection because we think it makes us cynical or what's the word I'm looking for? Not a pessimist. If we like, look, let's prepare to hit the ground. Like, oh no, come on, don't be a pessimist. But our phone gets protected. Our phone gets charged. Our phone gets treated like royalty. Why is it if Why is it if you walk out of your house with your phone at 10%, you're professionally irresponsible? But if you walk out of your house at 10%, socially, physically, emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, you're dedicated to your job. Like that's the difference. Okay, you would never walk out of your front hall with your phone at 10%, and we do it all the time. One of the tricks I use is every week I ask myself, did I treat myself with the same level of respect I treat my phone? Some weeks it's no, but by asking the question, I have to come face to face with the reality.
Wow. You really made me think about my own battery in
Yeah.
that situation. So thank you for that. We also had some questions around question number 3 on your
Mhm.
list there about courage in the workplace. I think so often we work to always know the answer, always get it right, never make a mistake. And so, how do you suggest people can try this courage piece at work? It's certainly requires some vulnerability.
Well, okay, first of all, you just use an amazing word, vulnerability. And one of the most important things that whoever is the culture creator at work, because it's one thing for me to give advice when I also recognize that some of the people asking the questions, you don't get to create the culture or decide if people can be vulnerable, for instance. Um, but vulnerability creates healthy workplaces because vulnerability isn't about being weak, it's about being open. And one of the things is that you can help about in your own workplace is if you are a management level, being open and vulnerable yourself says to people in your office, you can take it for granted that you will be forgiven for your mistakes and what you perceive to be your shortcomings, which isn't to say that mistakes won't be addressed, that they won't be corrected, that they'll be ignored. It's not to say that what you identify as your shortcomings, that we won't take steps to deal with that in some way. But it says that by you openly making a mistake, by you saying it's okay, by acting it's okay when you make a mistake in front of others, you're not saying go ahead, screw up everybody. I think that's what we worry about, is that if we don't do it right, what we're saying is, what is it? You promote what you permit, right? When you make mistakes and you deal with them well, it says to everyone around you, you can do that too. And when we remove the fear of making mistakes and we replace it with the structure necessary to forgive and deal with, everybody changes. But the first thing that you can do, whether you're a manager or not, the number one thing you can do to start to change the culture of how mistakes are dealt with in your workplace is changing how you deal with other people's mistakes. However you treat other people's mistakes, that's how your mistakes are going to be treated. And so one of the number one things that we can do is to have a discussion within the group about what makes people not want to be open about their mistakes. And it can't be because so-and-so will be mad at me. It has to be a more general, but it's really important to sit people down and say, within the workplace, what are you afraid of? And it doesn't, you don't want it to be personal, but, oh, I'm worried if I do this, it might hurt me for a promotion. I'm worried if I do this. If you are a manager, one of the best things that you can do, or an owner or a whatever executive, is to be willing to ask the people who you wish to lead and empower, what are they afraid of? And they may not want to answer. They may think it's a trick question, but the number one thing you should make yourself aware of if you are a culture creator is, what are the sources of fear within your office? And most of it, if you talk about it openly, most people will say, oh, like I'll commit to not creating that kind of environment. And you'll have to correct people when they do. But one of the number one ways, my friends, is start talking and asking amongst, what are people here afraid of? You might be appalled at what you discover your employees, for those of you who are managing or have direct reports, you might be absolutely horrified to discover what they're afraid of in the workplace. Ask, because as a leader, here's the difference between politics and leadership. In politics, fear is added to try to win. In leadership, fear is removed to try to succeed. But fear is such a powerful thing that we don't want to go anywhere near it. But by actually empathetically asking people, what scares you here? I'm scared of being open about this, or I worry if I do this, this will happen. Other people will go, oh my God, me too. I thought I was the only one. To find a healthy way to sit down and say, what is the source of fear or anxiety here? I honestly want to know. And then how you react to hearing it and letting people know that you were telling the truth when you said you want to know. It's a powerful thing to talk about what scares people, and having the courage to ask the people around you, what scares you? Usually we're afraid that it's going to start a bitch fest. What it actually often starts is a, oh my God, I thought I was the only one fest, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. That leads itself well into this final question that I have for you, and that's about creating that culture where people feel like they can be 100% of who they are. You started using labels for yourself today, Drew, that often people feel like they need to hide.
Mhm.
And you just put that right out there. So, how can we as leaders feel that same level of comfort to not only share who we are 100%, but also create that culture where our team feels like they can be 100% of who they are at work?
A couple of things. That's such a big question. One, I'm not sure. I think maybe we have to let go of the idea of ever being 100% of who we are. Like there's just parts of us that don't belong at work. And I hope that's not coming off as counter to what I'm saying, is that I think too much of a percentage of who we are is hidden, or that we take on a persona at work. It's not to say everything of who you are, like nothing is private. But I think what's important is first to ask yourself to really take an assessment. Am I someone who is a culture creator here, or am I someone who isn't? Because I want everyone to know that I recognize that I come from a place of pretty big privilege when I do this. I'm a straight white dude born in Canada, who has his own company and his, financial independence. So the consequences for me talking about my bipolar, my alcoholism, my battles with my weight, whatever it might be, the consequences to me doing that are significantly lower than for a large number of people watching this who may not have their own business, who may have more than one job, struggling financially, members of minority groups who have systematic barriers. It's easier for me to say it. So one of the first questions, if you want to create a better workplace, is, are you in a position where you need to suggest to someone that this sort of cultural shift needs to happen? Or are you someone who can actually start to make it happen yourself? And I think that recognizing that this is not always a right away thing, that you need to take a step back and say, am I in a position where the first step should be, am I going to be open about who I am? Or should my first step be, should I recognize the influence I have here to be able to start asking other people what their barriers are? Like if you're in a place where you can simply say, I'm going to drop some barriers, I'm going to be more open and vulnerable at work, usually you're in a position where you can help create that position for other people as well. Ask yourself first, am I in a position where I can help this for other people? And as I do it for myself, and if you're not that person, forgive yourself and let go of the idea that you are responsible for changing your workplace culture when you started there 2 months ago. Like, if you're asking this question because you're like, oh, like I want it to be like that, but it's not like that in my workplace, remember that you can only control your behavior at any given time, and recognizing that this can be a long game. So to answer that question, it really depends where you are in an organization. If you're lucky enough to be a culture creator, get on it right away. Like take a look back and say, what is stopping people from feeling like they can do this at work? And what role can I play in helping to change that? And you should get on it. If you're not in that role, don't feel hopeless, don't feel helpless, and don't feel like you're screwing up because you haven't changed the workplace you've been in for 3 months. It's a long game, but make sure that your behavior is a way that you say, I wish I could see more of this around here. Because you'd be amazed at how many people are like, I wish that too, but nobody else was willing to step up and start. And so recognizing that your behavior is more controllable than an overall culture shift. I am in many ways a realist. People say I'm not actually an optimist. I'm an idealist, which means I'm annoyed all the time. Someone told me optimists tend to be more upbeat because optimists believe things will get better. Realists get frustrated, or idealists get frustrated because we want things to be better and we recognize that they're not. We dwell more on that fact than on trying to make it better. I think it's just important to recognize where you are and what your power lies so that you don't beat yourself up for not being able to pull off something massive. But first question to ask is, am I actually someone in a position where if people are feeling ways that aren't healthy in the workplace, I'm someone who can help change it? If you are, step one to make your workplace better for you is to start recognizing your power to make it better for people around you. That could be a super long answer, and I'll think of like 19 things that I wish I had said afterwards. Right now we're writing a goofy book that's called Mundane Powers, which is what superpowers would you choose if your superpower had to just make your life a little better, but not actually ever get you a nemesis. Things like I'd be able to eat any food anywhere without spilling. I'd like to be able to eat a meatball sub on a motorcycle. But one of the powers my friends wants is that beautiful answer that you come up with an hour later. I wish my superpower was it always showed up at just the right moment. I wish I had that superpower right now, but I hope that was somewhat helpful.
I love that. Although the meatball sub on a motorcycle, also a great goal to have.
Yeah, to be able to eat anything anywhere without spilling would be one of those mundane powers. It'd be awesome, but really nobody's going to be your arch nemesis as a result. I want superpowers, but I don't want an arch nemesis. So I know it's goofy, but people love coming up with things like what would be a mundane superpower? I would like my clothes to iron as I put them on. No one else would know I have it, but my life would be awesome.
I love it. Those random thoughts are going to be rolling through my head all day today.
Exactly. And if anyone's got good ones, email me.
That's fantastic. I see a future TED Talk in the works there. Mundane superpowers. Drew, thank you. What an incredible morning together that we've had today. I feel incredibly energized as I look forward and so grateful for the opportunity to learn more from you here today, so that I can go back with intention and create not just my to-do list, but my to-be list. So thank you for what you do to challenge us as leaders. It does make a difference. You matter, and we appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Thank you again to our leadership and talent development sponsors. Thank you for making these great opportunities available for our members. And with that, I'll say thank you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you, everybody.